Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am Dungeon Master Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video I am going to be continuing my series on how would I run AD&D First Edition for the modern player. So in today's video I am going to be talking about Session 0 and expectations. So I'm going to start off by describing the expectations that I want my potential players to understand what can they expect from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition in the way that I will be running it. So I think it's really important to have this kind of a pre session, if you want to call it. Session 0, that's fine. But I think it really is important to sit down with your players and explain what's the game that we're going to be running, what can they expect, and what do I expect of them, and then they can of course give some suggestions as what they hope to expect from me. So I'm going to go right into it. I just started writing a little document so that I can, so I can get these ideas sorted out and everything. And it doesn't mean that it is not going to change or evolve over time, because I've never had a session 0 and then the campaign in its fourth or sixth or 10th month or so hasn't changed over the course of that time. So without further ado, let me jump right into my layout of what I would tell a new player sitting at my table. So here we go. Up, and I have the wrong thing up there. I will get to that view as well. So okay. So writing AD&D First Edition for modern players. Setting expectations, so very, very important. There are a few major differences between AD&D First Edition and most modern TTRPGs, and those differences will create both a different experience and a better one, in my opinion. So, of course, all of this is my opinion, and this is not how you should run AD&D First Edition for modern players, but how I would run AD&D First Edition for modern players. So PCs in AD&D First Edition will not have as many abilities. They will have fewer options within the action economy. And whereas combat scenarios will be much faster, the combat will be more challenging and potentially consequential. So bottom line, I think that many of the two major tabletop role-playing games out there, 5th edition and Pathfinder, let's say Pathfinder 2nd edition, both of those have a much more, many different layers to their action economy. Whereas AD&D First Edition, you basically can do half a movement, an attack, or an action, casting a spell or something along those lines, and then your other half of movement, or one full movement, and then your action, whatever it is. There is no, there are no second winds. There are no, unless you have a haste spell cast on you. There's no reaction abilities. There's no, there's just no multi-layered actions that you're going to have at your disposal in AD&D First Edition. And that really does, believe it or not, streamline the combat in the sense that, the players only have to think about, one or two things that their characters are going to do. They're going to either choose to move half their distance, then do an action, or all of their distance, then do an action, or do half their distance, do an action and then another half to put them in a different location. Um, Very, very quick in comparison to, having all of these different types of actions that they can do, during the course of their particular turn. So, and then more consequential. And what that really does mean is that, you know, in my opinion, players have to focus more on what everyone's doing. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail. And there's not as many chances of healing up and whatnot, so that these combats do get much more consequential, potentially more consequential, and I'll go into more detail there. So I would also inform the players. AD&D First Edition will force you to plan more before combat and react more quickly during combat. It is best to know the capabilities of your party members, pay attention to what is going on during the combat, and remember, fleeing is always an option. In time, you will learn when to fight and when to take flight. That is very, very important. Anytime that I have run very long campaigns of AD&D First Edition, my players became much more proficient in situational awareness. They really started to realize, what each character has at their disposal, without having to read each other's character sheets. It was just over time that they learned what each were capable of doing, and during combat, they were, whether it was their turn or not, they were paying attention to what was going on and then reacting to that. So sometimes they would change up. Well, my character was going to do this, but now my character is going to do that because I should reverse that and then this. Now, as a reaction, a response to what is going on, in the moment. And so they will become much more accustomed to making these very, very quick, decisions while they're involved in combat, let's say. And that's really important. It really does bring, in my opinion, a dynamic to the gameplay for the players. I think that they will get more out of it because they're more invested in what is going on. They're more engaged with paying attention to what's actually happening during the combat and then adjusting their plans of what they might be doing. I have in the past, and I didn't include this in here, but I have in the past had player characters lose their initiative, right? So I have had them lose their action during a round because the player wasn't prepared to act, and just, if he or she has to start fumbling around looking for what they're going to have their character do, I think that is reflective of their character in a combat situation, becoming confused by the action going around them, and so they lose their action. It didn't happen very often, but it is something that should be potentially more consequential, right? That's where I get into that consequences. So paying attention during combat, even if it's not your turn, is super important. As your DM, I assure you that all combat scenarios will have ways in which they might be avoided, but if engaged in, will be challenging and rewarding. Sometimes minor combat scenes will appear to be easy. However, they all deplete your resources, whether it's spells or hit points and whatnot, and that alone may add more challenge for future encounters, right? There is no short rest in AD&D First Edition. That is such a a differential between Fifth Edition and older editions of Dungeons and Dragons that I think you really do have to explain it out to the modern player, especially those that are just so familiar with being able to rely on short rests, that you got to go out and you have to tell them, explicitly, you're not going to have ways of increasing your hit points, or getting back some spells that you've casted just by resting for a few minutes in between actions taking place. You're going to have to wait until your full long rest in order to gain your spells back, and you're still not potentially going to regain all of your hit points back. You're only going to gain one if you're sleeping overnight. Now, I tend to add a constitution bonus to that as well if your character has it. But for the most part, you're not gaining back a lot of hit points unless you're healed with either potions or healing or some herbal, usually have herbs and that kind of stuff that can do 1 to 2 hit points of healing on their own. But it really is an important thing for the players to understand that their characters are heroic, but they're not superheroes, and they're not going to recover from combat very, very quickly. So, and same thing with their spells and such and whatnot. There are no short rests in AD&D First Edition. Long rests don't restore more than 1 hit point or so. I already went over this without actually scrolling down. I'm looking at it. Resource management. So gear and ammunition, is something else that is very important to bear in mind, right? So there is an attrition of capability in AD&D First Edition that is that is not comparable to 5e or Pathfinder. You're going to have, now you might keep track of arrows and sling stones and those kinds of things in 5e and Pathfinder, but it's not to the same extent as in AD&D First Edition. Moving on. So PC and NPC character death. AD&D First Edition is a less forgiving system than most tabletop role-playing games. You do not have death saves at your disposal, nor rolling with advantage to avoid the consequences of unlucky rolls. The best way to avoid the risk of death or to recover from unlucky rolls is to recognize the possibility of either happening and to plan ahead on how you or the party will respond to it when it happens. So, that's a huge difference. By removing the death saves or not having death saves at your disposal, your players are going to have to be much more cautious, but not at the expense of taking bold actions when they are needed. And again, this is another one of those things that they're going to have to balance out, as they're learning to play within this system. All right, so when a PC or an important NPC for the party dies, it is important for the survivors to remain focused on the situation of the moment, end the threat or flee from it. Then decide how you will move forward in the absence of the fallen party member. For the player of the fallen PC, begin thinking about your replacement character and how you might integrate that character into the party. Both the DM and you will take a few minutes in a sidebar conference to discuss how that integration will happen in a way that will make the most sense. So, Character death, PC death, is not something that that needs to completely disrupt the game session as it's going. Right, it, take a few minutes break, from the table. The DM and the player will, sit to the side and come up with a way to get their next character integrated into the campaign. I don't recommend that that player just goes home. I'm saying that that's a little bit too extreme. I don't recommend that they spend the time at the table rolling up a new character and then just having that character appear as well. There needs to be some kind of sense being made out of it. Now, if both the DM and the player decide that, probably the best thing would be is that once they leave this dungeon, that's when a new character will be added into the group. And again, tying it in some way to what has already been going on in the campaign is a really good way to do it. Another note with a character dying, a PC dying, is that just because that character has died doesn't mean that you're just moving on and never thinking about that character again. I think it's really important to be reflective of the fact that uh, players put a lot into their characters, and you as a DM might have attachment to some of the characters that your players have created as well. And so you want to create opportunities in the future where mentions of that character come up. All right, whether it be you encounter you encounter an NPC that was somehow related to that character. Maybe they came and they're looking for that character, and it's a way that you can tie in some side quests and things like that, where the players can still remain kind of connected to those fallen comrades, and and remember them once again. And I think it's a really cool way to give the message to your players that just because your character has died doesn't mean that that character was not meaningful to both the party and to you as the dungeon master as well. And future stories might not be woven into what the rest of the party is doing connected to that fallen character. Uh, the next thing, and this is really, really important, is to player knowledge versus character knowledge. And this is something that I really started to um, fully grasp the importance of this in my previous AD&D First Edition campaign that ran a little over 2 years, and separating player knowledge or meta from character knowledge is an extremely important aspect of role playing. All right, it's not just a matter of saying I understand how my character can function, as a class and with their attribute scores and their class abilities and their equipment that they're carrying. Their knowledge base is something that is also increasing. All right, and that is important to be reflective of. So it is also very important in reflecting a character's growth of knowledge as he or she explores the world and adventures. As a DM, I will not allow a character to know things outside of what he or she has experienced. I may even change the stats or abilities of a creature simply to subvert the player's expectations and then maintain that change for the remainder of the campaign to keep that consistency, right? Or at least I would have a really uh, a really well known, or at least eventually known reason for that inconsistency. All right. So if I change the aspects of of goblins, let's say, I want to create a sub race of goblin that now these goblins are are furry, and they're in a an ice region, and they have frost as a as a breath weapon, just to make them really unique, or and do something like that. Well, that is subverting the expectations of, you're not just fighting regular goblins. I've subverted the expectations with dealing with whites, where they didn't have the level draining ability, but they did have the ability of like a frost breath. And actually, that was what I really did. It wasn't goblins, but I did this with whites instead, to again subvert those expectations that these things were going to be level drainers, instead of just doing a lot of frost breath damage when they connected with their bites. PCs learn from doing, trying, and experiencing, and not because the player read a rule book. All right, so that, I think, is a really important thing for the players to start to understand about their characters. And it's been my experience, and I firmly believe that the players are going to get far more out of AD&D First Edition than they might have expected. I think that it's important to do this, and this is not exclusive just to AD&D First Edition. I would do this with just about any tabletop role-playing game that I would be running, and it doesn't even have to be a fantasy genre either. So I think a lot of these expectations are universal, and you can carry them into other game systems as well. So that's pretty much where I wanted to just talk about the expectations that the players would have in engaging with this system, and some of the things that I would, of course, explain to them ahead of time before we actually begin playing, and and give them some sense of how they should be thinking about their characters and their character growth over time. So, and I think that's probably the greatest benefit that I have seen from doing these things, is because, like I said, when we ran through my more recent AD&D First Edition campaign, 2+ years, about 2 years and 3 months or so, characters went from first level to about 11th level in that 2 years and 3 months time. We were playing weekly. We were playing, between 3 and 3.5 hour sessions or so, and the players really did understand the group dynamic, and their characters were fully realized over that long span of time. They knew each other's secondary skills, and they knew each other's some of their non-weapon proficiencies, and they had expectations of what they would do in various types of situations that they were in. Almost like they would know, like if a player was absent for the session, if I wasn't taking control over the player character and another player was playing them, we often said, that's not what this character would normally do, based on the way the player had always played it. And I still have this kind of thing happen, even with like Castles and Crusades, or my current Castles and Crusades campaign, because I know these players and how they play their characters so well. I kind of know what they would do in their absence. What would the character do in the absence of the player? And everyone else sitting at the table generally would be like, yeah, that's true. We probably would never do that with his character, and so we just move forward with it. So again, I think it's really important to when you're trying to introduce an older game system to modern players that you try to ease them in to some of the differences between the two different eras of system, and you try to ease them into the fact that that not only are some of the mechanics of the game going to be different, but there's going to be some challenges that they might not be that used to, and that it's still a good thing that they aren't exactly the same, that they are able to see, hey, you know what, this is this is a different experience, and I think in many cases that they will walk away from the table thinking that that was a better experience than they were at least expecting, and that's what I hope. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, I encourage you to leave your comments in the comments section. If you hadn't subscribed, please consider subscribing. Hit the like button, do all of that stuff. It's great for the algorithm and gets the video much more much more out there, and so others can see it as well. As always, I look forward to seeing you on a gaming screen sometime soon or at a convention. This is Saturday. I lose track of days sometimes, so I will be into my third day basically at Page 2, so the Philadelphia Area Game Expo. Around this time, I'm probably sitting in. I might be sitting in a game at this time, or I'm certainly watching something. I'm probably playing a game at this time. I won't be running until about 7 o'clock each night. That was another thing I did with my convention schedules now, is that I've started scheduling 3 game sessions that I'll be running at either 7 or 8 p.m. each of the 2 or 3 nights that I will be there, and so I think that's been working out really well. So at this time, I'm probably sitting in a game and playing a game uh, this time next Saturday. So anyway, thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed this video, and you will have a great rest of your weekend. Take care.